He knocked at dawn. Not hard, but steady, like someone counting seconds instead of knocking. When I opened the door, he didn't say good morning. He just looked past my shoulder, toward the backyard, and said, "I think you should come see this." I had lived next to Arthur for 6 years. Retired, methodical. The kind of man who trimmed his hedges with a ruler and never spoke, unless there was a reason. If he was standing on my porch at 5:42 a.m., something had already gone wrong. He said he'd been awake early, sitting by his kitchen window. Insomnia, he called it. Then he paused, like he was choosing words carefully. "I saw movement," he said. "Not an animal, and not a person walking." That distinction bothered me more than the sentence itself. I followed him around the side of the house. The grass was wet, the air still cool. Dawn light hadn't fully settled yet. It flattened everything, removed shadows but didn't quite reveal detail. My backyard looked the same as it always did. Old maple tree near the fence, tool shed in the corner, uneven patches where grass refused to grow. Arthur stopped near the fence line and pointed. "There," he said. At first, I didn't see anything strange. Then my eyes adjusted. The soil behind the maple tree was disturbed. Not dug up completely, just enough to look intentional. A shallow rectangle, about the length of a suitcase. The edges were too clean to be an animal. Too careless to be a professional. I stood there longer than I should have. Arthur waited. He didn't fill the silence. "I didn't touch anything," he finally said. "Didn't want to contaminate it." That word, contaminate, made my stomach tighten. I told him I'd handle it and thanked him for coming over. He nodded once and went back inside without another word. No curiosity, no offer to help, just relief at handing the responsibility back to me. I stood alone in the yard for a few minutes after that, long enough for the neighborhood to start waking up. A car engine somewhere, a dog barking 2 houses down. Normal sounds, trying to reassert themselves. This house had been quiet for years. Too quiet, if I was honest. I moved here after the divorce, after deciding I wanted something smaller, more controlled. No surprises. No shared walls. No history. I kept my routines tight. Work, home, dinner, sleep. On weekends, yard work. Predictable. Clean. That's why the disturbed soil felt personal. Like a message written in a language I didn't want to understand. I grabbed a shovel from the shed, not because I planned to dig, but because standing there empty-handed made me feel exposed. The handle was still cold. I pressed it into the ground near the edge of the rectangle. The soil gave easily. Too easily. I stopped. There are moments when your body knows something before your mind allows it. This was one of them. I remember noticing how quiet everything had become again. Even the birds had stopped. I covered the spot back up with my foot, smoothing the dirt as best I could. Whatever this was, I wasn't ready to face it alone. And I wasn't ready to involve anyone else, not yet. Inside the house, I washed my hands even though they weren't dirty. Then I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. No reason on the surface for anything in my backyard to have changed overnight. But I couldn't stop thinking about what Arthur had said. Not an animal, and not a person walking, which meant he'd seen something moved. Or placed. I didn't go to work that morning. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the backyard through the window, waiting for it to look normal again. It didn't. And the longer I waited, the more I realized something worse. Whatever was out there hadn't just appeared overnight. It had been there longer than I wanted to admit. By mid-morning, the backyard looked ordinary again. That was the first problem. Sunlight had reached the maple tree. The disturbed soil blended back into the rest of the yard as if it had never been touched. From the kitchen window, I could almost convince myself that Arthur had imagined it. Or worse, that I had. I tried to work, opened my laptop, answered 2 emails without reading them. My eyes kept drifting back to the window, measuring distances I'd never cared about before. The space between the tree and the fence. The angle of the shed. The way the ground sloped slightly toward the back corner. I knew this yard. Or at least I thought I did. Around noon, I stepped outside again. No shovel this time. Just a tape measure from the junk drawer, the kind with faded numbers and a cracked casing. I told myself I was only checking something minor. The rectangle Arthur pointed out had been roughly 6 feet long. I measured from the trunk of the maple toward the fence. 6 feet landed exactly at a patch of grass that never grew properly. That patch had always bothered me. I blamed shade, or bad soil, or my own neglect. But standing there now, the explanation felt thin. Grass doesn't refuse to grow in clean lines. I knelt down and brushed the surface with my hand. The soil felt compacted beneath the thin layer of grass, pressed down, not settled naturally, as if weight had been applied and then removed. That's when I noticed something else. A metal edge. Not exposed. Not shiny. Just the suggestion of it beneath the dirt, like a straight line that didn't belong in a yard this old. I scraped gently with my fingers until I felt it clearly. Cold. Flat. Manufactured. I pulled my hand back fast, like I'd touched something alive. My first instinct was to call someone. Police. City services. Anyone who could take responsibility away from me. My second instinct canceled the first. Because I recognized the shape. It wasn't a pipe. Not debris. It was the corner of something rectangular. Something deliberate. Something I should have remembered. I sat back on my heels and tried to think. When I bought the house, the inspection report had been clean. No buried tanks. No septic issues. No notes about prior construction in the yard. I'd read it twice. I was careful like that. But inspections don't catch everything. And sellers don't disclose what they don't think matters, or what they don't want found. I stood up slowly and looked toward Arthur's kitchen window. The blinds were closed now. For the first time, I wondered how long he'd been watching my yard before that morning, whether he'd seen smaller changes and dismissed them, or whether what he saw today was simply impossible to ignore. Back inside, I dug through a folder I hadn't opened in years. Closing documents, receipts, the original listing photos. I spread them across the table like evidence. The backyard photos were wide shots, taken in summer, green, full. The maple tree was younger then, thinner, the fence newer. The patch of bad grass was there too. I hadn't imagined it, but in one photo, just one, the ground near the tree looked smoother, less sunken, as if something underneath hadn't settled yet. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, the kind that comes when too many small details start aligning. At 3 p.m, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You found it, didn't you? No name. No context. Just that sentence. I stared at the screen, waiting for another message. None came. I tried calling the number back. It rang once, then went dead. I looked out the window again. The backyard was empty. Still. Ordinary. But I knew then that the strange thing Arthur had seen wasn't the beginning. It was a reminder. Whatever was buried back there wasn't meant to stay hidden forever. And someone else already knew I was close. I didn't reply to the message. Not because I was calm, but because answering felt like stepping into a room where someone else had already turned off the lights. I needed to understand what it referred to before I acknowledged that I'd found anything at all. Instead, I opened the county property records. I'd never had a reason to look at them before. The house was mine. The mortgage was clean. Taxes paid on time. History didn't matter once ownership was settled, or so I thought. The records loaded slowly, scanned PDFs with uneven margins and dates stamped in faded ink. I scrolled past my own name and kept going backward. One owner before me. Then another. Then another. Nothing unusual at first. Then I noticed a gap. Between two owners, there was a 3-year stretch where the house existed on paper, but no one officially lived there. No sale. No rental license. No declared vacancy. Just silence. Properties don't sit undocumented by accident. Not in this county. Not for 3 years. I cross-checked with the tax assessor's site. The house was listed as temporarily uninhabitable during that period. No reason given. No inspection photos attached. Uninhabitable doesn't mean abandoned. It means something happened that required explanation and repair. I felt that pressure again, building behind my eyes. I searched the address online. News archives. Forums. Local blogs that hadn't been updated in a decade. At first, nothing came up. Then, buried on the 3rd page of results, I found a short police blotter entry from 13 years ago. No headline. Just a paragraph. Unconfirmed report of a disturbance at a private residence on Maple Ridge Drive. Officers responded. No charges filed. No further action taken. Maple Ridge Drive was my street. The date matched the start of the undocumented gap. I read it again, slower this time. Unconfirmed report. Disturbance. No charges. Those words were meant to close doors, not open them. Still, my hands were shaking as I printed the page and set it beside the listing photos. The house hadn't been empty. It had been quieted. That evening, I knocked on Arthur's door. He answered almost immediately, like he'd been expecting me. Same clothes as the morning. Same controlled posture. He didn't invite me in, and I didn't ask. "Did you know the previous owners?" I asked. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Enough. I knew of them," he said. "That's not what I asked." Arthur looked past me again, not toward the yard this time, but down the street. Checking. Measuring. "They kept to themselves," he said. "Until they didn't." I waited. "There were arguments," he added. "At night. Then nothing. Cars gone. House dark. For 3 years." I asked. He nodded once. "And you never wondered why no one moved in?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I wondered," he said. "But wondering doesn't mean asking." That answer told me more than he realized. People who live next to something long enough learn how to coexist with it. They adjust their routines, their sight lines, their curiosity. They learn what not to see. Back at my house, I stood in the backyard as dusk settled in. The maple tree cast a longer shadow now, stretching almost exactly over the patch of bad grass. I tried to picture the yard as it had been 13 years ago. Younger tree, newer fence, the ground less settled. Something heavy had changed the soil, and then been covered. My phone buzzed again. Same number. "You weren't supposed to dig." That was when I understood the contradiction. Whoever sent those messages didn't care about the yard. They cared about the timing, which meant what was buried back there wasn't just part of the house's past. It was part of someone else's present. And my mistake wasn't noticing it. It was taking too long. I slept with the lights on that night. Not all of them. Just enough to make the house feel occupied. The porch light. The kitchen. The hallway. I left the bedroom dark on purpose, the way you do when you don't want anyone outside to know exactly where you are. At 2:13 a.m., my phone buzzed again. No message this time. Just a missed call from the same number. I didn't return it. Instead, I checked the locks. Front door. Back door. Basement. All secure. I told myself that mattered. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited for the sun to come up, watching the backyard through the glass like it might move on its own. By morning, I realized something else had changed. My trash bin was closer to the fence than I remembered. Not much. Maybe a foot. Enough that I could convince myself I dragged it there without thinking. But I hadn't taken the trash out in 2 days. I walked the property line slowly, counting steps. Near the back corner, just past the shed, the grass was bent in a narrow path, flattened in a way wind doesn't manage. Someone had stood there, long enough to shift their weight. Facing my house, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that comes when your routines are no longer yours alone. Inside, I reviewed the last week like footage played too many times. The dawn knock, the disturbed soil, the message, the records, Arthur's pauses, all of it pointed outward, toward the yard. But the yard wasn't the center. I was. That afternoon, I drove to work for the first time since this started. I parked, locked the car, and paused. The side mirror was angled wrong. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. I adjusted it, then checked the others. When I came back out 8 hours later, it was wrong again. Someone was close enough to touch my car, comfortable enough not to rush. On the drive home, I took 3 unnecessary turns. The same sedan stayed behind me through all of them. Neutral color. Clean. Unremarkable. The kind of car that never stands out unless you're looking for patterns. When I pulled into my driveway, it continued straight. I stood there with the engine off, listening to it disappear. By then, the idea that this was about what was buried in my backyard felt incomplete. Too simple. If it were just about keeping something hidden, intimidation would have come earlier. Stronger. This was something else. This was surveillance. That night, I went back to the shed. I didn't dig. I checked the walls instead. Old pegboard, rusted nails, a shelf I'd never used. Behind it, barely visible, was a newer screw, shiny compared to the others. I unscrewed it with my fingers. The shelf shifted. Behind it was a small, square cut in the wall. Poorly done. Rushed. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a USB drive. No label. No note. Just wait. I didn't plug it in right away. I held it instead, feeling how light it was, how easily it could have been missed. Or left behind. This wasn't something buried years ago. This was recent. My phone buzzed again. You should have left it alone. That was the moment the story changed. Up until then, I'd been reacting. Observing. Collecting. Now I was holding proof that someone had made a mistake. Not in the past, but recently. And mistakes mean leverage. I locked the shed, went inside, and shut every blind in the house. Whatever was happening didn't belong to the house anymore. It belonged to me. I waited until after midnight to plug it in. Not because midnight mattered, but because the house was finally quiet enough that I could hear my own breathing again. I closed every application on my laptop, disconnected from the internet, and pulled the curtains tight. Paranoia comes in stages. This was the stage where it felt reasonable. The USB didn't show a name, just a folder. Inside it, 3 video files and a single document. I opened the document first. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a threat. It was worse than both. It was a schedule. Dates, times, locations, all of them familiar. Too familiar. My commute, my grocery runs, the mornings I worked from home. Even the one evening a week I stayed late at the office. Each entry had a timestamp and a short note. Arrived early. Left late. Lights off by 11:37 p.m. This wasn't surveillance from a distance. This was someone watching closely enough to notice patterns I didn't think I had. I scrolled to the bottom. The most recent entry was from 2 days ago. The morning Arthur knocked. I opened the first video. The angle was wrong at first. Tilted, low, partially blocked. Then I recognized the view. It was my backyard, filmed from the back corner near the fence. The maple tree dominated the frame. The patch of bad grass set just inside view. The timestamp showed it had been recorded at night. In the video, someone entered the frame. A man, hoodie up, face never visible. He knelt near the tree and placed something into the shallow rectangle in the ground. Not carefully, quickly, like someone who didn't expect to be interrupted. Then he stood, stepped back, and looked directly toward the camera. Toward Arthur's house. That was when I understood the first reversal. The USB wasn't hidden to protect whoever buried something in my yard. It was hidden to be found. I played the second video. Daytime this time. The same angle. The man wasn't there, but I was. Me, standing by the kitchen window, staring out at the yard. The video zoomed slightly, focusing on my face through the glass. I didn't remember that moment, but the timestamp said it was real. The third video was shorter, recorded just after dawn. Arthur walking along the fence line, stopping, looking down at the disturbed soil. Then the camera shut off. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. Fear had been replaced by something colder, clarity. Arthur hadn't discovered anything by accident. He'd been meant to see it. And I hadn't been chosen randomly either. Someone needed a homeowner who would hesitate before calling the police. Someone predictable. Someone alone. Someone like me. I thought back to Arthur's words. I didn't want to contaminate it. He hadn't meant evidence. He'd meant responsibility. My phone buzzed again. Same number. Now you know. I typed my first reply. Why me? The response came almost immediately. Because you'll wait. They were right. Or at least, they had been. I looked out at the backyard again. At the tree. At the ground that had already been disturbed once, and would be again. The real mistake wasn't that I'd found the USB. It was that whoever planted it assumed I would keep reacting instead of acting. They thought the house controlled the story. They were wrong. Because once you realize you're being used as a buffer between a secret and exposure, you stop protecting the secret. You start deciding who pays for it. I didn't respond after that. Silence was the first thing I took back. The next morning, I went to work as usual. Same time. Same route. Same coffee stop. I let the patterns remain intact because patterns are comforting to the people watching them. At home, I changed everything. I moved the laptop to a different room. Slept on the couch instead of the bedroom. Left lights on in places I wasn't using and off where I was. Small inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to blur the picture. Then I focused on the USB again. I copied its contents onto an old external drive I'd never registered anywhere. No cloud. No backups. I watched the videos frame by frame this time. Paused on reflections. On shadows. On anything that didn't belong. The camera angle bothered me. It wasn't from Arthur's window. It was lower. Closer to the fence. Which meant someone had installed it deliberately, then removed it. Recently. The screw in the shed wall confirmed that. This wasn't a long-term operation. It was temporary, which meant they were running out of time. That afternoon, I knocked on Arthur's door again. He didn't answer. I waited. Counted seconds. Knocked once more, harder this time. Still nothing. The blinds were open now. The house was empty. Arthur hadn't just stepped out. He'd left. No car. No note. No warning. I checked with another neighbor. Casually, like you do when you don't want to raise alarms. She said Arthur's house had been listed that morning. Quick sale, she called it. Cash buyer. That settled it. Arthur was never meant to stay. He was a relay point. A witness who could disappear without questions. Someone old enough that people expected quiet exits. Which meant the final phase was close. That night I dug. Not where they expected. I didn't touch the patch near the tree. Instead, I followed the measurements from the video. Counted steps. Angles. The man had paced before kneeling. He wasn't measuring the hole, he was aligning himself. I found the real spot 3 feet to the left. Buried shallow. Wrapped tighter than the USB had been. A metal case. I didn't open it outside. I carried it in, cleaned the dirt off at the sink, dried it carefully. Inside were documents. Originals. Deeds. Old permits. And a flash drive different from the first. Older, scratched, unlabeled. This one wasn't meant for me. It was meant to stay hidden. I understood then what the backyard really was. Not a grave. Not a hiding place. A transfer point. People had been using this property long before I owned it. Moving things through. Letting time and normalcy erase trails. The 3-year gap in ownership wasn't abandonment, it was active use. And I bought the house at the wrong moment. Or the perfect one. My phone buzzed again. We need to talk. No threats now. No commands. Urgency. That was their second mistake. Because urgency means something broke. I replied with a single word. When? The answer came seconds later. Tomorrow. Early. I looked at the metal case on the table. At the documents spread beside it. At the second drive. Heavier with consequence than the first. They thought this meeting was about containment. They thought I was still the buffer. But buffers absorb impact. They don't redirect it. And tomorrow, for the first time since the knock at dawn, I wouldn't be reacting. I'd be choosing where the truth landed. We agreed to meet at dawn. Same hour Arthur had knocked. Same light. Same quiet. That wasn't coincidence. It was habit. People reuse rituals when they think control comes from repetition. I didn't bring the metal case. I brought copies. Printed documents in a plain folder. The original drive stayed hidden, sealed, untouched. If this went wrong, I wanted leverage that survived me. The location was a public park 3 miles away. Parking lot still empty when I arrived. Fog low to the ground, thick enough to erase distance but thin enough to see shapes move. A black sedan pulled in 2 minutes late. One person got out. Not the man from the video. She was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, maybe. Hair tied back. No jacket despite the cold. She walked like someone who didn't want to be remembered, but also didn't expect trouble. She didn't offer a name. Arthur left, she said, like an apology. That wasn't supposed to happen so fast. I didn't respond. She glanced at the folder in my hand. You found more than we planned. That was the admission I needed. You used my house as a handoff, I said. You planted something to make sure I noticed. And you used him to make it feel accidental. She nodded once. Professional. Calm. It was supposed to end there. But it didn't, I said. No, she agreed. Because you dug. That word again. Dig. Like curiosity was the crime. She stepped closer. We can fix this. You give us what you found. We compensate you. Generously. You move. The house becomes someone else's problem. I waited before answering. Long enough to feel the weight of the moment settle. I already copied everything. I said. And I didn't keep it all in one place. Her expression didn't change, but her breathing did. That was the point of no return. You shouldn't have done that, she said. You shouldn't have involved me, I replied. Silence stretched. Fog shifted around our feet. The sedan idle behind her, door still open. What do you want? She asked finally. I opened the folder and slid one document forward. Just one. A permit with a name on it. A real name. Not a shell. Not a placeholder. I want this to stop, I said. Not for me. For the house. She looked down at the paper. Then up at me. You don't understand what you're holding. I understand enough, I said. And so will anyone else who sees it. Her jaw tightened. If you release that, you don't walk away clean. I don't need clean, I said. I need distance. Another pause. Longer this time. She closed the car door behind her. That small action mattered. It meant the conversation had shifted from contingency to consequence. Arthur was supposed to observe, she said. Not interact. He broke protocol. No, I said. You did. When you assumed I'd wait. She studied me then, not like a threat, but like a variable that had just entered the equation. You keep the copies, she said slowly. For now. We'll buy the house. Above market. Quietly. You leave within 30 days. And the backyard? I asked. She hesitated. That ends, she said. Completely. I believed her. Not because she was honest, but because stopping was suddenly cheaper than continuing. I nodded once. 30 days. She extended her hand. I didn't take it. We both understood why. As she drove away, the fog began to lift. The park looked ordinary again. Joggers appeared. A dog barked somewhere nearby. Normal life resumed without knowing how close it had come to something else. I sat in my car for a long time after that. Because once you negotiate with the truth, you don't get to pretend you were just a bystander anymore. You become part of the outcome. And the outcome was already moving. The sale closed in 21 days. No sign. No listing photos. No open house. A wire transfer appeared in my account with a reference number instead of a name. Above market, just like she promised. Clean enough to satisfy a bank. Quiet enough to avoid questions. I packed slowly, not because I needed the time, but because I wanted to see what else surfaced when the house began to empty. Closets reveal habits. Garages reveal intentions. Houses give up their secrets when they realize you're leaving. Nothing else appeared, which was exactly what worried me. On my final morning there, I walked the backyard one last time. No digging. No measuring. Just observation. The grass looked healthier than it had in years. New soil had been laid. Fresh sod. Someone had already tried to erase the outline. That told me everything. They weren't just ending it. They were rushing. I didn't tell them about the envelope. I prepared it after the meeting. One copy of the documents. One drive, one typed note. No accusations. No conclusions. Just dates, addresses, permit numbers, and a sentence at the end. If this reaches you, the property has changed hands again. I mailed it the day after the closing. Not to the police. To a journalist. Local. Semi-retired. The kind who still answered emails personally and didn't trust anonymous tips unless they came with paper. I didn't stay to see what happened. 2 weeks later, I was renting a small place 3 towns over when the article ran. It didn't mention my name, or the backyard, or Arthur. It focused on zoning irregularities, on a shell company that appeared and disappeared across properties with unusual gaps in ownership, on permits that didn't match renovations, on inspectors who had signed off and then quietly retired. It wasn't dramatic. That was the brilliance of it. No scandal language. No speculation. Just facts laid out in a way that invited questions. By noon, the company named in the article had pulled its website. By evening, the house I'd sold was no longer owned by them. By the next morning, the article had been shared enough times that removing it would have made things worse. My phone buzzed once that day. A number I didn't recognize. This wasn't part of the agreement. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. You said it would end. No response came after that. I watched the follow-up coverage from a distance. Contractors interviewed. City officials refusing comment. A quiet internal review announced, and then quietly expanded. Nothing exploded. which meant everything changed. A month later, Arthur's house sold too. Different buyer, different name, same rush. I never saw him again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that first knock at dawn. About how easily I could have dismissed it. Closed the door. Gone back to sleep. People talk about turning points like they announce themselves. They don't. They arrive quietly, politely, with a sentence that sounds almost casual. I saw something strange. What matters isn't what you find. It's what you decide to release once you understand what it's worth. Because once the truth moves into the open, even partially, it stops belonging to anyone who thought they could bury it. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They never do. They came in smaller ways, quiet adjustments that only made sense if you knew what to look for. The first was financial. The money from the house sat untouched in my account longer than it should have. I didn't celebrate it, didn't invest it. It felt provisional, like something earned under conditions that could still change. I kept expecting a reversal, a call, a letter, something that said the deal was being reconsidered. Nothing came. The second consequence was professional. At work, a project I'd been waiting on quietly disappeared from my schedule. No explanation. No meeting. Just reassigned. When I asked, my manager shrugged and said priorities had shifted. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. I understood then that distance has a cost. Not punishment, separation. The third consequence was worse. I started noticing how often I looked for patterns that weren't there. Cars that slowed too much. Neighbors who lingered outside longer than necessary. Ordinary things began demanding explanation. Once you've been watched, your mind doesn't easily accept that the watching has stopped. I checked locks twice, then 3 times. I memorized exit routes in places I used to relax. No one had threatened me since the article. That was the point. Threats end stories. Silence extends them. A few weeks later, another article appeared. Smaller. Buried deeper. A zoning official placed on leave. An internal audit expanded again. Language softened. Names disappeared. Accountability diluted just enough to keep the machine running. Justice, I learned, rarely announces itself cleanly, but it leaves marks. One evening, while unpacking the last box in my new place, I found something I'd forgotten about, the old tape measure. The one I'd used in the backyard. Dirt still trapped in the crack along the casing. I almost threw it away. Instead, I put it in a drawer. Because that tape measure wasn't just a tool. It was the moment my life stopped being theoretical. I never heard from her again, or from anyone connected to the transfer. The number that used to message me stayed silent. Eventually, it stopped existing. But every now and then, I'd search the old address. New owners moved in. Family. Kids. Fresh lawn furniture. The maple tree gone. Removed completely. They hadn't just changed the property. They'd erased the anchor. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because erasure is confirmation. It means something was there that couldn't remain, not even as memory. The final consequence came months later, in the form of a letter forwarded to my new address. No return name. No logo. Just paper. Inside was a single sentence, typed, centered. Some things only stay buried if everyone agrees to forget. I read it twice. Then I burned it. Not out of fear, but because I finally understood the exchange I'd made. I hadn't won. I'd exited. And exits cost something too. Peace, I learned, isn't the absence of threat. It's the decision to stop carrying it forward. I closed the drawer with the tape measure inside and turned off the light. The house was quiet. This time, the quiet belonged to me. The knock stopped haunting me before I noticed it had. That's how it works. Fear doesn't leave dramatically. It fades the way sound does when a door closes somewhere far away. You don't realize it's gone until the silence feels different. Months passed. I settled into routines that weren't defensive. Morning walks without scanning reflections. Grocery trips without timing exits. I stopped memorizing license plates. Stopped counting footsteps behind me. Life didn't become lighter, but it became mine again. One afternoon, while cleaning out that drawer, I finally took the tape measure out. I rolled it open. 6 feet. Then 10. Then snapped it closed. And for the first time, it was just a tool again. I thought about Arthur occasionally. About how carefully he'd chosen his words. How he'd knocked instead of calling. How he'd passed responsibility without ever admitting he'd carried it for years. I don't think he was a villain. I think he was tired. People like to imagine that secrets are guarded by powerful hands. Most of the time, they're guarded by ordinary people who don't want to be the last one holding them. I never went back to the old neighborhood. I didn't need closure from the place. The place had already served its purpose. It had shown me how easily stability can be borrowed, and how quickly it can be reclaimed when you're willing to let go of it. Sometimes, just before dawn, I still wake up early. Not startled, not afraid, just awake. And when that happens, I remember the sentence that started everything. I saw something strange. Strange isn't always dangerous, but it's always an invitation. An invitation to look closer, to decide whether you'll turn away or accept the cost of seeing clearly. I accepted the cost. I paid it in quiet moves, careful choices, and a life that looks smaller from the outside, but feels cleaner on the inside. The truth didn't make me brave. It made me precise. And precision is enough. I turned off the light, lay back down, and let the morning come without waiting for it to knock. What would you have done after that knock at dawn? Would you dig or walk away? Tell me in the comments.